Okay, now that I'm this, if you're not familiar, is a picture of the T series, but the top of the T series, and it's one of our spectrum analyzers. And the reason I'm pointing this out is I want people to understand, and that's why this is a basic course, that all of these are a little different, but they are all, except for some of the newer ones, using the same graphical user interface. So if you're not sure, go to your machine and look. Here's your input, RF 50 ohms, and it tells you what the max voltage and the max dBm that it can handle. You don't want to exceed that. Same with any of your other things. The external reference in is designed for 10 dBm. The reference out, the external trigger, the external trigger is designed for 5 volts DC. That's it. That's the max. So you want to keep those in mind when you're using any of the units. The GPS is designed for just a GPS antenna. And of course, the standard USBs and the Ethernet port. And for those who are not familiar, any of the models that have the Ethernet port can be remote controlled with just a web browser. This is for the E and the T series. If it has the Ethernet port, you can remote control it with just a web browser. No special software required, and we'll get into that. Now, to show just one different model, this is the top of the LMR Master. This one has a lot more connectors, and you have to pay attention to what connectors for what. Where the RF in is versus the VNA ports for doing cable sweeping. And of course, those have a lot less power they can handle because they're not designed to handle power. They're designed to sweep antennas. And as far as the front panels go, I'm just going to show the LMR Master. But the T series and the E series, the front panels are pretty much identical, just the T series just a slightly bigger. Everything on here is touchscreen. You have your standard number pad with shift functions. And the only thing that you won't see on the remote display is this twiddle knob for going up and down certain menus. Let's move right along. And I have my LMR Master hooked up, and it's currently sitting at an IP address of 192.168.0.16. And all I had to do was type that address in, and it brings me to this page. Now you'll notice it says password. That's only if you have put a password into the machine prior to this. And because these are designed to be remote controlled but not left on forever, you have to request a certain amount of time, up to 10 hours. I'm just going to put 6 hours just for the heck of it, and I'm going to commit to log in. Very simply, it gives me all kinds of information. It gives me the ability to capture the screen, capture a trace, the files. But for today, remote control. And I have my machine in front of me. I have full control over everything in the machine. And that's how I'm going to show you the basics today. So for the E and T series, the first and foremost button is the menu button, other than the power button, which you don't see on here. If you can't find the power button, we need to talk. So, menu button. When you click menu, you get the menu on the screen. These are the functions that you have and the shortcuts that you've created for that individual instrument. Instruments will vary depending on what licenses you bought for them and things of that nature. For this particular instrument, because it's an LMR Master, you'll see not only the standard spectrum analyzer and cable sweeping and everything, but you'll see a lot of the LMR standards are covered. You just click on the one you want and off you go. Now in this case, I'm in spectrum analyzer mode. I'm just going to click on it again and stay in spectrum analyzer mode. Depending on which mode you're moving from and to, it can take up to 50 seconds to change. Going from the VNA to the SPECE and the SPECE back to the VNA, that's the longest change. It takes about 50 seconds. Some of the others are shorter, but the longest one is 50 seconds. I know if you're waiting for the water to boil, it takes a while. I've timed it in front of customers. I don't know how many times. It's 50 seconds. All right. The first thing we need to do is look at the shift functions. Now, the shift functions are those that correspond with the shift key and the words that are written either above or below the numbers, depending on whether you're looking at the machine itself or looking at the remote control. Now, I'm going to go ahead and press shift, and notice that the word shift appears to the right of the battery gauge. That means that my next function will not be the number, it'll be the words that are written. So I'm going to hit 9, shift mode. Very simply, this is the same list minus shortcuts of the functions that are in the machine. We kept this in here for emergency purposes, and we'll get into the emergency stuff a little bit later. You can either go up and down the list, select what you want, or just escape if you're already where you want to be. Shift and then the 8 function is the system controls. First and foremost here is the status button. I'm going to go ahead and click the status button just so you and I have an idea of what's going on. It's going to give me the status of the unit. It's going to tell me if there's an IP address assigned, what it is. It's going to tell me the internal operating temperature of the unit, what the battery charge is, all kinds of good information. The most important things on this page: your serial number if you're calling the 1-800 line for something and they want to know the serial number of the unit. But the overall most important is right here. Package version, v.380. That is the firmware version that is in this machine. So if you ever want to know, hey, what version of firmware on, there it is. It's right there in the status. Escape to get that off the screen. Now, we give you a couple of self-tests. You don't have to press these. You can if you wish. The unit does self-tests when you boot it up, so keep that in mind. But now we move on to the GPS functionality. You'll notice GPS is listed with an arrow. That means you're going down a menu level. Now, don't think that if you go down a menu level in these machines, you have to go back up. You can press any other button to go any other where you need to. We're just letting you know you're going down a menu level. So I'm going to click GPS and bring up its menu, and it's very simple. On and off, voltage selection for 3.3 or 5 volts, depending on which antenna you may have, and GPS info. Now, I don't have it turned on because I don't have connectivity in my home office, but I want you to see that it'll let you know how many it's tracking, latitude, longitude, altitude, of course, time code and things. But the ones I want to point to you that I find important is GPS antenna voltage and GPS antenna current. Most people don't think of it this way, but you could, if you have a different antenna that's either 3.3 or 5 volts, and you can adapt it to the SMA connector on top of the machine, you can turn that antenna on and see how many it's seeing, but more importantly, the current draw and if there's any voltage drop. Because when the current starts to go up, that's when you know your GPS antenna, the LNAs in that antenna, are starting to get weaker, or they're starting to have issues possibly, unless it's a no voltage one. But be that as it may. Most people don't think you can do that. You can check your GPS with this if you need to. Reset just makes it unlock and relock the GPS. And just so you understand, when you do turn it on, it puts the voltage to the connector, but what it'll do is up here in the status bar, it'll show you the coordinates with the GPS, red or green. Obviously red, I don't have a lock. If it was green, I would have a lock and you would actually see the latitude and longitude coordinates. Okay. Turn that back off and continue on. Calibrate touchscreen. If you have to calibrate a touchscreen, please use the stylus that is normally attached to the side of the machine or to the soft case. Calibrating the touchscreen, they want you to do it in a very methodical way. You're going to have little X's that want you to press on, and if your fingers are like my fingers, not a good idea. Use the stylus that comes with it. Application options. These will be certain things you can change based on which mode or which application you're in. In the spectrum analyzer mode, if I click on that, I can change my impedance from 50 ohm to 75 or other. Obviously, you need a impedance matching transformer for that, an adapter. Bias T, if you have the bias T installed, you can put out bias T voltage, and you can change it to auto reference level. And going back, and finally the system options themselves, very straightforward, date and time. Click on it, and depending on how good your fingers are, you can catch these little arrows, or you can just hit the button and enter what you need for date and time. Now this is the local date and time. It's whatever you set it to be. It is not influenced by the GPS time. If you save things and then export that data to an Excel spreadsheet, you'll see both the local time that you have installed and the GPS time that the GPS was hooked up. Ethernet config. You can configure your Ethernet port. You can do it either dynamically with the DHCP, or you can set it manually. Now, if you're trying to do a direct connection, say to your laptop, I normally do things manually, and I do the easiest way I know how. I make the laptop 10001 and I make the machine 10002. And I just use a 3255 and 0 subnet. So it's all on how you want to do it, but right now I'm doing it on a network, so the network assigned it 192.168.0.16. All right. But realize that you can do that. Can you go through firewalls? No. No. There's no way to go through firewalls unless your machine is on an open port to the point where it can be seen by anyone on the internet, that IP address. Normally, it works well within your own subnet, your own net. Language. Yes, you can change the language of the machine. Is there something other than English you prefer to work in? Do you want to work in Spanish or French or Chinese or Japanese or Korean or Russian? We have several available. And here's the first of what I like to call my don't panic modes. If you have it set to one language and someone decides to have a little fun with you and put it into some language you're not familiar with, and you have no idea how to get it back, don't panic. Very simply, you would turn your machine off, press and hold the escape key and turn your machine back on. Don't let go of the escape key until the splash screen comes up. That will put the unit into factory defaults. It will not affect any files you have saved or any setups you have saved. It'll just factory default the unit, and factory defaults in our case is the English language. So you can get right back to English and go from there. Display. This is something that we added to make things easier. And we have a couple different modes we can go between, but there are two I want to point out. Beyond default, and you can change the brightness, I want to point out black on white is the first one. This gives you a black trace on a white background. Now it's a lot brighter on the screen itself than it is on the remote control. This is what I like to call day mode, when the sun is beating on the screen. Keep in mind, in most instances, your computer, your phone, you know what it's like when the sun's on that screen. You can't see anything. Does it make it perfect? No, but it makes it significantly easier. Now for the opposite, we have night vision. Night vision is a black background with a red trace. This keeps it from destroying your night vision when you're working in darkened areas, and it keeps it from, highlighting and shining a light on you. So realize that those are in there. Let me go back to default colors here. And then we'll press right on. And of course, there are a couple other choices that you can have a little bit of fun with. Name. Name only puts a name into the unit. If you're searching for it on the internet and things, it doesn't really do you any good or harm by putting a name in. Volume adjusts how loud or how soft the unit beeps, or if you're decoding something, the volume output of that. It's just a simple slide bar, and you just scroll it up or down to change how loud it is. Real straightforward. Reset. There are a couple things under the reset menu: factory defaults, master reset, and update firmware. Starting with the top, factory defaults puts the unit back into a factory default status. Does not affect anything you have saved. Master reset, however, will wipe the unit clean of all user files. And if you press master reset, like I'm about to now, accidentally, there is an "Are you sure" box. It'll tell you it's going to perform the reset. It's going to delete all the files. It's going to power cycle the instrument and everything. You can abort it at that point. but realize it's there. And there's no one button way to wipe the unit out. It's the same thing when it comes to deleting files later. There's no one button way to wipe the unit out on purpose. We want you to delete files, but carefully so that you don't lose stuff you actually need. And the last one here is update firmware. Very simply, the current process for updating firmware is simple. You go to the Anritsu website, you download the firmware, it's an executable file, and you run it. When you run it, it's going to want to extract to a USB stick. Once you have it extracted to the USB stick, you are going to end up putting the USB, and there will be instructions on there, but you put the USB stick in the machine, turn the machine on, it sees the software and says, hey, new firmware, do you want to update, yes or no? And then it says, hey, your files, do you want to save and restore them, and so on. Of course, the recommendation is always save your files off the machine before you do a firmware update, just in case. But that's the simple way. The update firmware is here for emergency purposes. If you had to force a piece of firmware back into the unit because something went wrong, we can still help you do that. Believe it or not, most units can be recovered without sending them back. All right. Pressing right along to reset, there's a couple things under the More button here. You can share your frequency between all your modes. You can set your remote access password. You can change the power on between the switch, or the button I should say, and the application of DC. You can even turn on an input power warning just to give you extra reminders of when the power is getting too high. This all modes for share center frequency does not translate to the VNA. It only translates to the other modes. The VNA is separate when it comes to that. Okay. That is everything on the system menu. Let's quickly move on to the file menu. Shift and then 7. Notice that we have multiple saves, 2 recalls, a copy, and a delete. The multiple saves have different features and functions. I'm going to skip to the second one. We'll come back to that first one. The first one is called Save Measurement. As if this is the measurement that I want to save. I need to take a shot of it. I click Save Measurement, and it gives me a full keyboard on the screen to name it, along with 5 quick name buttons that I could have pre-named with something like the site ID or the site address or the location to make my typing significantly easier. There's quite a bit of free space on the inside. Right now, I've got 7.2 gig inside this machine of free space, plus the fact that I could have, USB sticks hooked into it and everything. And when you say, well, how much can you save on that? Tens of thousands of files, tens of thousands. So just keep that in mind. But while we're on this save screen, I want you to notice that the buttons on the right did change slightly. It has to do with changing the quick names. But this one here, change save location. This lets you say, I want to save to not the root directory of the machine. I want to create a folder and save there. I want to save to this USB stick. It lets you change where you're going to save, but until you do a firmware update or some other change, it's going to keep saving to that location until you tell it otherwise. And of course, here you have the type of file change. It doesn't have to be a measurement file. It could be a setup. It could be a JPEG and so on. And you can access it there or here with the drop down, what you want it to be. I'm going to leave it as measurement for right now. And I'm just going to give it a file name. Yes, you have to press the buttons on the screen to do it right. Anyway, and of course I have caps and I have other things. And I'm just going to press enter. What's going to happen is it's going to save that file. I'll get successfully saved file to internal memory. Now, if it was some other location, it would be slashing whatever that other location is or whatever that other file folder is. So we went ahead and saved that measurement. Notice what I typed now appears in the Save Measurement As button with _1. This is a quick save. So every time I click it, it'll do a quick save, the unit will ding, and it'll roll the number up by 1. So now it's going to be number 2. Ding, file Anritsu 2 successfully saved. So you can get a bunch of quick shots that way. Save by itself can be whatever we want it to be, but it'll normally be whatever you used last. But this time, I'm going to change it to setup. Now, since it's going to be a setup file, which is a different file extension, and let's talk about that for a second. The file extensions, whoops, I hit the wrong button and I went back. Sorry about that. I should have hit the back button here, not the back button on my keyboard. Anyway, the file extensions are pretty straightforward. Spectrum Analyzer files are .spa. Setup files, STP. P25 files are P25, and so on and so on. LTE files are .LTE. The only one in this unit that's a little different than the others is the cable sweep files. In this one are .mna because it's a VNA board. Whereas if you're in a Site Master, they're either .dat or .vna, depending on how you have it set up. But a setup file will remember all the stuff from your setup, which includes limit lines, which includes where markers are placed, and frequency, levels, all of that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say that the way I had my machine set up is something I want to use in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and save that as a setup file, Anritsu setup, and it will save that and life goes on. Be careful. I've had people out in the field left it at setup and thought they were saving measurement files, and they ended up saving 50 of the exact same setup files. So please keep in mind what you're doing and watch what you're doing. Okay, and we'll come back to that in a minute. The last here is called Save on Event. This is unique to the Spectrum Analyzer portion, where you can actually have the machine automatically save based on one of two conditions. Either crossing a limit line that you would set over some or all of the signals, or every single trace, which means sweep complete. Every trace that goes by, it would save until it runs out of memory. So something that's rather unique, but it does help when you're looking for interference and you don't want to sit there all night. Okay. Recall measurement, just what it sounds like. You would click on it and you would recall one of the measurement files. Notice all you see here is Spectrum Analyzer files. This is another one of what I like to call my don't panic moments. If you have different files from different applications inside the machine, the only ones that will show up when you do a recall are the ones you can act upon. So if you're in the Spectrum Analyzer mode, you'll see Spectrum Analyzer files and you will see setup files. Now, because I was just looking for measurements at this point, I only saw the measurement files. If I go to just recall by itself, which will show me quote unquote all files, all I see are Spectrum Analyzer and setup files. If I had cable sweep files, I would not see them. Now, if I had a setup that would change me to cable sweep, I would see that. But I won't see any files that I cannot act upon. Very simple. Now, one of the things that you can do with your setup files is create shortcuts to them. Creating shortcuts, very simply, is you bring it up like this, and you have to press, and I can't do it with my mouse, but on the screen you have to press and hold that setup file for more than 3 seconds. When it does, the screen flashes and you come over to this. And you can use any one of the unused parts of this grid, click in it, and what I have now done is created a shortcut to that setup file on my main menu screen. Try to be as descriptive as you can with your file name so you know what you have, and the icon itself will be for whatever mode it's from. So obviously this is from the Spectrum Analyzer mode. If I had a different one from a different mode, it would show that icon. Anyway. If you need to get rid of that icon or switch that icon, you press and hold that icon. This only works for the shortcut icons, and you can either delete it or switch its location. I'm going to delete it. Now, the icon is not directly tied to the file, the setup file. And what I mean by that is if you went in and you accidentally deleted the setup file, it's not going to delete the icon. You have to go back in and delete the icon. So keep that in mind. Okay. Copy, very simply. Top part is the source. Bottom part is the destination. go down, highlight, and select. You actually have to select those files, folders, or any combination thereof, and then go to the destination and tell it where you want it to copy to. And when you're done, hit copy. And it will copy those files. It does not cut and paste. So it will only copy the files to the new location. So you still have to go back in if you want to get rid of them and delete them from the original location. That's so that you don't accidentally put them someplace and forget where you put them. Now the delete function, which I'm going to use here for a couple of these. Notice now, see these files here, JPEG? You'll see them in the copy function and the delete function. Those are the only places you'll see JPEGs, by the way. JPEG files cannot be brought back up on the screen in the E and T series. So you have to go back and copy them off. So just for an example, I'm going to select that setup file and that spectrum analyzer file. Now I could have just selected the whole memory and done it with one shot, but I will delete those, and it's going to ask me again, are you sure? Notice that no is the one that's highlighted. You actually have to hit the yes. If you just hit enter, it would be no. And those files are gone. All right. And since we were talking about those two other things, let's talk about these two icons real quick before we move on. Camera icon does a screenshot. If you click it, it does a screenshot and it uses date and time as the file name. If I click, for those of you who are old enough to remember 3.5-inch floppies, if I click the 3.5-inch floppy picture, it just takes me to save. Just a shortcut to the save. Okay. We just went over shifts 9, 8, and 7, and those don't change no matter which mode of operation we're in. The next couple will vary slightly depending on which mode of operation, so I'm not going to go deep into those, but first is shift 6, shift limit. And this is where I can create limit lines and limit masks. And you can make it as intricate as you need it to be or as simple as you need it to be. So if I came in and I just turned on an upper line and it's just that was all I needed, that's fine. I can adjust things if I want to edit it. You know, I can add points, I can move it in frequency, I can move it in amplitude if I want. There's all kinds of things you can do. Like I said, as deep or as not deep as you want it to be. I can create envelopes over what's on the screen and then go back and adjust points individually. And just so you understand, let me go back to the edit for a second. When you're in edit mode, whichever point is red is the one you're currently in control of. You can only move or change one at a time. It's going to be the same with markers later on. The one that's red, you're in control of. You have to get control of each one individually if you want to move them around. You can see them all, but you can only control one at a time. Okay. And you can get rather crazy and just have it as an alarm so that you get an audible alarm every time your line is violated, as opposed to saving traces. You can do it whichever way you want. Okay. That's shift 6. It's a little simpler in other things, and it's non-existent in some, but it depends on which mode you're in. I always start off in spectrum analyzer mode because I get the most bang for the buck in these shift functions. Shift 5 is our trace view. Now notice A is underlined. This is trace A, by the way. It even says it over here, trace A, normal. Trace A is the only one that has what's called normal mode. And it's view and write. I'm going to go to trace B just for, a quick thing to show you that you can put on multiple traces. And I'm going to make it view and write. And I'm going to go to B operations. And I know it's already been pressed. I'm going to press it again. Bang. Now I have the green trace as a max hold. And I could do the C trace as a min hold. You can You can go as far as taking the A trace, subtracting the B trace, and showing the result as the C trace, if that's something you need to do. So you can go very deep into these or very light depending on your needs. The reason I like to show just a normal and a max hold is it's kind of good to have a max hold when you're hunting for interference, so that if something happens and then all of a sudden the signal goes away, you at least know that the signal was actually there at one point, though it may not be happening at that particular moment in time. All right. I am going to turn off that B trace again, and I'm going to return my controls back to A. All right. Shift 4, shift measure. We break it down into a couple different things: power and bandwidth measurements, masks and carryover interference, AM/FM demod, and this is the only place in our spectrum analyzers you will find the ability to listen to AM or FM signals. Why did we put it in the spectrum analyzer portion? You'd be surprised how many times when you're hunting for interference, you can demodulate a signal, and just by how that signal sounds, you can tell that, hey, that's an old pager transmitter, and on the hour it'll go off in Morse code with its call sign. I can look up where they're coming from. There's quite a bit you can do. But under power and bandwidth, you can do field strength measurements, of course, occupied bandwidth, channel power, where you look at one specific channel over the air at a time and see what its power is versus the others, adjacent channel power, and EMF measurements, if you have the EMF probes and things, E-field probes, H-field probes, and we even have some isotropic probes. So those are all available to you. Pim hunting, that has to do with obviously looking for the source of Pim, where you have a Pim hunter running and you're using your spectrum analyzer to sniff around with a special antenna, looking for the sources of Pim, and of course coverage mapping, where you can actually go around and drive around or walk around and do coverage testing. Okay, and that's the built-in one. Shift 3, how your trace is going to go. Single or continuous. If it's single, sweep once, or sweep an average of 10, and sweep mode. Now, the E series and the T series are a little different here. Under sweep mode, in the E series, you have fast, which it defaults to, performance, and what's called no fast Fourier transform, no FFT. I understand why we have this in here, but I haven't used no FFT in the field. I've used fast and performance. If we were into the T series, we also have another one here called burst detect, which helps look for fast transient signals. And there's a help button to explain a little bit more about what each one of these does and how it operates. Okay, go ahead and hit back. And auto sweep time on and off. We allow you to slow the sweep down if you wish. We can't let you make it any faster than it could possibly process. So it's only going to go as fast as it possibly can if it's in automatic sweep time for auto mode. All right, triggering only has to do with using the external trigger in zero span in the ENT series, just so you know. All right, shift 2 does nothing in a spectrum analyzer mode, but shift calibrate does do something in the VNA mode, or the cable sweep mode. That's where you would start your calibration, your open, your short, your load, and so on and so forth. Shift 1, shift preset. Well, under shift preset, you'll notice save setup and recall setup. These are just different doors to the same room of saving a setup or recalling a setup. But preset, a bunch of us like to call it the magic button. The reason we call preset the magic button, preset will take only the mode of operation you're in and factory default it. It will not reboot the unit. It will not affect any files whatsoever. It'll just take the mode you're in back to factory defaults. Now, especially when using a spectrum analyzer, sometimes people will go in and make a change without realizing it, and make some strange change to and not realize they made this change, and then all of a sudden they're going, why is my thing not tracing anymore? What happened? What does this mean? Well, if all else fails and you're not sure what you did, what you made a change, you can go Shift 1 and then preset. And what that'll do is that'll preset, like I said, just that mode of operation. It only takes about 8 to 10 seconds. Sometimes it knocks my remote control off, and then it takes you back to the beginning. The spectrum analyzer is wide open and ready to go. Matter of fact, if I had saved that setup, I could have done the setup, but that's okay because I got 2 more things, and then I'm just going to go over a couple other small things, and then we'll take questions. So finally, here is Shift and then 0, Shift touchscreen. This allows you to start a touchscreen calibration, but notice this one here. Press 1 to go to arrow navigation. I'm going to press 1. Arrow navigation, basically, it's the ability to operate the machine by the buttons only without the touchscreen. The reason this is in here, we've had it happen. People are out in the field, hundreds or thousands of miles from their home base. Somebody drops a wrench on the machine and breaks the touchscreen because they dropped it from 20 feet up or however. As long as you can still see the screen, you can make it work with just the buttons by going into touchscreen arrow navigation. Excuse me. If I ever have this happen, and I've had things happen, I take it and immediately hook my laptop to it, use the arrow navigation to get it hooked to my laptop, and then I just do everything on my laptop. It just makes my life so much easier. If you ever accidentally go into arrow navigation mode, all you gotta do is power cycle the unit. And that's another good note for those of you who are not used to the VxWorks platform. One of the advantages of VxWorks is there's a boot up, but there's no boot down. When you turn the machine off, it's off. If you accidentally hit 5 buttons at once because your hand slipped and you went across the screen and the machine has a mini seizure because it doesn't know what to do next, just turn it off, turn it right back on. It'll just boot right back up and it'll be right where you left off. No issues. Okay. Rather quickly, of course, we can adjust the frequency, the amplitude, the span, the bandwidth, and the marker, and that will change slightly depending on which mode of operation you're in. But just for grins and giggles, I'm going to put it back with a start frequency of, let's say, 700, a stop frequency of 800, and an amplitude. I could do it auto reference, but I'm going to put in a manual reference of -50. And then I'm going to turn on the preamp. Get me about back where I was. I think before I was looking at a 50 meg span instead of 100 meg. But there's something else here that most people don't realize. The left side of the screen is actually active. It's actually active. So anything you see on the left side of the screen that can be changed, if you click on it, it will take you to where you can change it. So let's say resolution bandwidth, RBW. If I click on that, it takes me and highlights RBW. Sweep time takes me and highlights it. Input attenuation takes me and highlights it. And that's in every mode. Whatever the setups are on the left that you can see, you can click on them and make those changes. All right, very quickly, of course, just for this mode, frequency, center, or start and stop, or center with span. Amplitude, of course, your reference level, your scale. And most people use the 10 dB per division because it's easier to count the lines by 10. Of course, preamp. But here's what most people don't think about. Units and detection, and this is in the spectrum analyzer mode. Is there something other than dBm you want to work in? You can. By all means, you can. Most people are going to work in DBM. But under detection, you want peak, RMS average, negative, sampler, quasi-peak. Now, I've done quasi-peak readings in the field, doing certain types of measurements. I don't normally use negative or sample in the field. Now, peak and RMS average all the time. So that's up to your needs. Of course, span. How much do you want around center frequency? And that's the other thing to remember about spectrum analyzers, any spectrum analyzer. Everything is based on the center frequency. So you always want to have the signal of interest at the center that you're going to do something with. Of course, your resolution bandwidth, your video bandwidth settings, if you need to see more or do more. Most people will leave it in automatic for probably 99% of their stuff. And then last, markers. When you first go to markers, it'll turn one on. In the E and T series, you have up to 6 markers along with deltas that you can play with. You can put them where you want them. You can actually, let me see if I can get it with my mouse. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. Yep, I did. You can drag and drop it with your finger. You can drag and drop it with your mouse to where you want it. I like to do it with my finger and then I fine tune it with the knob, but it's all in how you want to play the game. And you can marker many different things and go crazy from there. All right. Those, my friends, are just the basics, which is what I wanted to talk about today. Obviously, for those who have a desire, just let us know. We can do webinars on different specific features. I know one of my counterparts, Roy Anderson, has started one on spectrum analysis. But if you wanted one specific to, let's say, how to use the P25 analyzer or how to use the VNA versus the cable sweeper, just let us know. Shoot us an email, let us know what you want to see so that we can do it. And in case you didn't realize, I like to do things as live as I possibly can. I try, unless I absolutely have to, I try not to teach by slides. I like to show things because it's, like I said, it's the way I learn. I learn by doing and touching and everything else. So, and I'm sure most people are that way. All righty then. Let's go here, and let me go here. And now we're in a part of questions. And of course, that's my email address for those who are unfamiliar with my email address. But
thanks, JD. Do you want me? I have some questions for you.
Please go right ahead.
Okay. First one is, I have a S332E that only has a USB port, no Ethernet port. This cannot be remote controlled, correct?
Well, let's talk about that for only a brief moment here. And this may be, most people may not be familiar with this, but as far as the remote control I'm using, unfortunately, no. But if you are so inclined, you could get that Ethernet port added, depending on you'd have to call in and check and see based on the serial number of your machine. But I never say no, because there is a form of programming called SCPI, Small Computer Protocol Interface, SCPI. And we allow for SCPI commands to be sent over USB to control a unit. Matter of fact, if you go to the website and look up your unit and look down, you'll find a manual called a programming manual that'll list all the SCPI commands for your instrument. Now, if you're using it in the field, it's kind of impractical. The idea behind the SCPI commands is more for, let's say, the production floor where you're doing the same test over and over and over, and it's just easier to hit a button on the computer, say, okay, run the test, and it steps everything through it. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Try not to get too long-winded.
Yeah, we have several more. Next one, is there a part number for the stylus? The one on my LMR is missing.
I know we have a part number there. I don't know it off the top of my head, but my favorite thing is bug your local sales guy. Tell them, hey, we want to see you and bring us a stylus.
There you go. Thank you. Great.
We want lunch and bring us a stylus, darn it. At least they can get to the part number.
That's
and
right.
it should be listed right on the brochure. Keep in mind, I don't know how many people get a chance to do this. When you go on Anritsu.com, if you go to the search box at the very top, the little search hourglass, and type in your model number and let it search, and then when the search is done, you click on your model. The amount of information that is available right then and there between application notes, brochures, manuals. Oh God, it's almost mind-numbing how much information is actually there at, for the taking as you need it. So keep that in mind. All that stuff is right there. And if you need to, send me an email and I'll get you the part number.
Thank you. Okay, the next question. Is it possible to synchronize the time to a NIST server whenever it's connected to the network?
No. How's that?
So the answer is no. Thank you.
No, not to my knowledge with these. Now, granted, like I said, there are two separate times in these machines. There's the GPS time and the local set time. If your GPS is on and running, the GPS time is always there.
Okay, next question. Can the setup file store calibration data as well? Or does calibration need to change each time the setup parameters are changed?
That's a great question. And let's talk about that just a little bit. This goes into a little bit of VNA or Cable Sweep 101. When you run a calibration, most people are calibrating at the end of a phase stable test cable. And all is fine and well and good until either the internal instrument temperature changes enough, and in most of our instruments now it's a pretty big window, to where it requires a recal, or you shut the machine down and turn it back on, having removed and reinstalled the cable. Now, will it save the cal? Yes, it can. Can you reuse the calibration data? Yes, you can. But keep in mind, there will be some uncertainty if you've removed the phase stable cable and put it back on. Now, if you're doing something along the lines of, I want to sweep 7 to 8, 8 to 9, 17 to 21, you could set up all three of those, calibrate and save with calibration, and then just flip back and forth, back and forth, back and forth while you're on the site. Because you're not changing the cable, you're not doing anything to upset the cal, and as long as the temperature doesn't change too much, you can flip back and forth between them at will. And that's what I've done in a lot of cases where I had to sweep multiple bands. I would set up all, the bands I need to sweep. I would go in, band 1, calibrate it, all right, save it with cal. Band 2, calibrate it, save it with cal. Band 3, calibrate it, save it with cal. And I just keep flipping back and forth. I hope that answers that question.
Okay. Did you cover RBW in the webinar?
I really didn't get deep into RBW only because I know Roy's doing a class on that. Is there a specific question about resolution bandwidth?
Can you go deep in the best way to set up if it depends on we're doing indoor or outdoor mapping?
Ooh, indoor or outdoor mapping. That depends on which way you're doing your mapping, among other things. Allow me to try to be a little more specific. Most of our machines can do outdoor mapping very simply. They're designed for it. You can import or not import a map because you're doing everything with GPS coordinates. It really doesn't matter. And as far as the RBW goes, it's going to depend on what you're looking for and what you're looking to do, and which signals you're looking for. Is the signal you're looking to map, is it 12.5 kilohertz wide? Is it 25 kilohertz wide? Is it 10 megahertz wide? And that's where the RBW is going to come in a little bit, so that you can see low enough so that you get an accurate reading. Let me get out of this for a second, and let me go back to my fun and exciting spectrum analyzer display. And I'm going to just pull my antenna loose for a second. Now, right now, the RBW is set up based on the span, how much span I've given it. If we go to the bandwidth measurement, you'll see that the automatics say take the span, divide by 100, that's your RBW. Then you take the RBW, divide by 3, that's your VBW, your video bandwidth. Anyway, obviously with 100 mega span, our RBW is 1 meg. Now with preamp on and everything else, now remember I took my antenna loose and I did that on purpose. What signal do we see? Well, we don't see any signal, obviously, unless there was something really strong leaking in. This, what you see here, is the noise floor of the machine, not necessarily the noise floor of what's in the air. If I were to take this noise floor and someone said, hey, what's the noise floor at 750? And just go and say, it's a 105. Not exactly. The machine's noise floor is a 105 at 750. And then I could get into the whole, I could spend probably an hour just talking about KTB, you know, Boltzmann's constant, temperature and bandwidth, and how the noise floor and is affected by what your RBW is and what your what the width of your receiver. But suffice it to say, if you're looking for signals, you want to make sure that when you're done setting everything up, this is below your needs. And I'll explain. If I go in here and say I want to do a channel power measurement. So I want to define a channel, and in this case, it's 10 meg wide, turn it on, and get a channel power reading. The green dotted lines show me where it's denoting my channel power. It's taking all of the information that it sees from the noise in here and saying my channel power is neg 93. So keep that in mind. It's using just the noise of the machine and giving you a channel power. If I were doing, let's say, a P25 system and I had to prove a neg 97, well, gee, it's always above neg 97. It's neg 93 because I have this set up in not necessarily the right way. That's why some of the functions like the P25 have their own mapping in them to help set it up the right way so you get the best readings possible and the most accurate readings possible. Whereas if I were to change the bandwidth now, and instead of 1 meg, I went by a factor of 10 to 100 kilohertz. My channel power density is still about the same, but notice where I'm at now, because I'm still 10 meg wide, obviously. It's still taking all the data it sees here. But my sweep is going to start slowing down. I'm at 400 milliseconds. Let's go another factor. Let's go 10. Channel power still stays the same because it's still concatenating all of this information together. But now my sweep is 1.8 seconds. So at this point, it's because my channel power is so wide, there's not a lot I can do except change my channel power as far as the bandwidth of my channel that I'm actually looking at. So I'll give it one quick change here. We'll go from 10 meg to 1 meg. Oops. I accidentally changed the center frequency. My bad. Not paying attention to what I'm punching here. 750 megahertz. And span of 100 megahertz. My fault on that. Sorry about that. But now notice because I've got it down lower, channel power densities at neg 100. Because I'm only looking at that much information. I've gotten it as low as I can, and I'm looking at that much information there. Okay, we could spend a long time on that.
Right. So
I hope
JD,
if that doesn't answer your question, please send me an email. We'll talk. We'll
right.
we'll get crazy.
Yeah, we have a few more questions, JD, but we're running short on time. So I'm going to take a couple more, and then JD will have all your questions. So he can reach out to you after the event, or you can again reach out to him. But let's see. JD, here's maybe a short question we can answer. You have a lot more features in your menu. How can you add the LT analyzer to his instrument?
Well, it depends on which instrument you have. Some instruments allow for it, some don't. So
Okay.
if it's an LMR master, all you've got to do is pay for it, and we send you a license key.
Okay. Okay. Another maybe short question is, how can you show a drive test that was accidentally by measurement?
How can I show one more time?
How can you show a drive test that was accidentally by measurement? Measured accidentally?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Okay.
If you could get them to either
Yep.
send it to me directly or
Yes.
retype it. Thank
Okay.
you.
We will follow up.
Yeah,
Okay. Let's see.
I need more info.
Yep. Okay, great. I've got all your questions, so thank you all. And again, I got your references on future webinars, so that's great. I'll share those too. So JD, I want to thank you very much for today's presentation, and I want to thank everybody on behalf of Anritsu and our presenter. Thank you for joining us today. This concludes our webinar. Thank you.